We are recording from the fake news capital of Canada. I'm Candice Malcolm. It's Fake News Friday, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague, journalist Andrew Lawton, and we are on the floor of the convention of the Canada Strong and Free Conference, formerly known as the Manning Conference, and there is so much going on in Ottawa. It's so interesting to be here, Andrew. I mean, is this your first time back since the trucker convoy?
Yeah, it is actually. This is the first time I've been in Ottawa since the convoy ended, and that was the weekend when I was pepper sprayed. And from my hotel room, I have a lookout that is staring directly at where that happened. So it's bringing back all sorts of painful, literally memories. But
PTSD.
Yeah, no, it's good to be back here. I've always enjoyed Ottawa, so it's fun to be here.
You know, Ottawa is a beautiful city, and the architecture, the people, it's a great place to be. But it is also a painful reminder. We are like deep in Ottawa establishment territory, home of all the gatekeepers, home of the elites who don't want to hear from Canadians. They don't care what Canadians think. They want to basically ram their opinions down your throat. And you really feel that amidst all of the bureaucracy. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today, Andrew, it is Fake News Friday. It was World Press Freedom Day this week. And so you'll hear a lot of virtue signaling from liberal politicians who we all know don't care at all about press freedom. They don't care about a truly independent press. They don't want the facts to get out to Canadians. And yet they're more than happy to get onto Twitter, virtue signal, whether it's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland. I heard an anecdote. They had like a dinner, like an awards dinner, basically congratulating themselves on their press freedom. And this is what the Liberals do. This is what the media does. They focus on attacks on the press outside of Canada, right? Like, oh, there's this looming threat of lack of press freedom in places like Hong Kong. Look at these brave journalists in Ukraine. And they're completely blinded to their own hypocrisy. And the focus, rather than being on actual press freedom and allowing journalists to do their jobs, getting out of the way, stop the subsidies, stop funding journalists that you like and punishing journalists that you don't like. Instead, their focus, Andrew, is on disinformation and misinformation, which is the latest buzzwords that call for them to basically censor. They want censorship. They want to censor the internet. They have these internet censorship bills. They don't like critical journalists. They don't want journalists who are going to do a lot of digging and hold them accountable in the way that journalists are supposed to do. And so the main focus of this kind of event is one, on look at these horrible countries around the world that don't acknowledge press freedom like we do. And two, how can we censor the internet to scrub opinions that we don't like, including by independent journalists? What's your take on all this?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that the look over there strategy is one that the Liberals love doing on human rights. They love saying, oh, we got to look at Congo and Venezuela without looking in our own backyard and our own front yard. And I mean, I mentioned earlier that the last time I was in Ottawa was covering the convoy. The reality is that was a huge moment where Justin Trudeau's government authorized police to go and arrest journalists for trying to do their jobs. It was only a handful of approved journalists, mainly people in the parliamentary press gallery, that were given free rein to walk the streets of Ottawa, and others, including myself, are threatened with arrest, even though the emergency order specifically said anyone who was there for a lawful purpose, of which journalism is still, at this time in Canada, could be there. But then you get into this idea of proving it. And you and I had talked about this in the past. One police officer was convinced by my verified Twitter profile. Another, I had a letter from True North. I had a phone number for one of our editors. And still they were saying, nope, unless you're in the parliamentary press gallery, you're not getting through. And in fact, you'll be arrested if you don't turn around. So when the government does this, it is not just against the idea of media freedom and the idea of free speech, but more fundamentally, it is, as you note, something that has a chilling effect on specific types of free speech, because it's never the CBC types that are targeted by this. It's always conservative, independent media. And I did a panel here at the Canada Strong and Free Network conference that talked about this. And the reality is independent media is kind of owned by the right now. It's the right that does really well on this. So when you go after independent media, you're targeting conservatives. You're targeting people on the right.
It's interesting your anecdote about how one of the police officers really wanted a government badge. That's the mindset here in Ottawa. Like everyone works for the government.
Well, because everyone has a government badge. I mean, the Starbucks employee has a government badge, I think, in Ottawa.
Exactly. No, but I think you're right. It's interesting because there is a lot of independent-ish journalists on the left as well. Journalism, there's lots of interesting sites. The weird thing is a lot of them just kind of end up becoming government funded or government subsidies. I'm thinking of places like the Walrus or just these kind of small.
The National Observer, which has like government funded reporters now. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So they don't stay independent because they don't keep that. And right now, I mean, with conservatives, it's like there's this whole growing movement of kind of grassroots independent shops. There's so many of them now. It's great to see, but it's like, you know, it's a David Goliath situation because we're up against not just the behemoth of the CBC that gets $1.5 billion a year, and they really, really influence the press galleries because they outnumber everyone else, right? But then you also have the corporate media, the woke sort of capitalism that's seeping in. We heard from Jamil Javani, who was a former radio host at Bell News Talk 1010 in Toronto, and he was basically talking about how even though he is an independent-minded Black man, he wasn't woke enough for the high ups at Bell, and he was forced to use. And then you have the newspapers who also help shape the news front, and they're subsidized now. They have the media bailout, and so it's really, you know, we feel like we're doing really well. It's fun to be at a conference like Canada Strong and Free because it's filled with conservative activists, and so many of them tune into True North, and we really appreciate. We love coming to these kind of events and these conferences and getting to meet the people who support True North, watch our programming. It's great to connect with the sort of grassroots base in that way. But we're so small, Andrew, compared to these big giants, and you really kind of feel like you have your work cut out for you. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I would also say that the challenge is going to be, I mean, just to illustrate it with an anecdote, one of the big things that we see as people on the right is that obviously people on the right support independent media and they support it, but it goes down that road of almost siloing it, where you've got, your mainstream, which is for the left, and your independent, which is for the right. And the problem with that is that we want to be able to expand our audience. And I have no issues with watching CBC. And I mean, I do, but I generally, in theory, I have no issues with it because I want to see and have a broader discussion and a broader conversation. And it is challenging because we are in a space where we don't have a level playing field. We don't have the subsidy head start that a lot of these other groups on the left do. But I also think that content is king in a way, and content eventually is what's eroding the trust in the mainstream media. It's their content, and it's what's elevating trust in independent media. And it's not just tooting our own horn. There are others that we are ostensibly competing with that are in a very similar boat. But that takes time. It takes time to sort of release that stranglehold that the mainstream media have on official media.
And it's interesting too, because I mean, this kind of goes back to like libertarian capitalist theory. It's like, the bad companies keep getting subsidized, so they keep doubling down on their bad business strategies.
It's not a free market.
Yeah, and so it's like in a normal market, those companies would be forced to make real decisions that might lead to innovation. I'm thinking of a group like the Winnipeg Free Press, right? This has been a newspaper forever. More than half of their funding now comes from the government. And you go on their website and it's like really clunky and old, and they're not entering the 21st century. They're not bringing it, and it's the same thing with these big post media, these big unionized shops that don't know how to collect news anymore. I was talking earlier with Holly Doan, who is its founder, and she runs Blacklock's Reporter, and they just do tremendous independent research and independent media. And she made the point you just did about content is king. It's like people want good journalism, and they're really increasingly not getting that from the mainstream media anymore. So they're turning to independent people. I really do feel like we have our work cut out for us. So I want to talk to you. The big story of the week is something that's spilling over from the United States. This decision that was leaked out from the Supreme Court of the United States, overturning Roe versus Wade. People who are familiar with this court case, like, it's almost universally agreed that this case was really poorly argued, that it doesn't stand up to scrutiny, that it's a very bad decision. And yet, this question of abortion, the abortion debate in the US is spilled out. They're having it. It's happening in the United States, spilled into Canada. All of the politicians on the left, all of the media have used it as an opportunity to say, well, first a virtue signal about how glorious Canada is because we don't have abortion laws, but then also to try to turn it against the Conservatives. We know in 2019, a large part of the reason why I think Andrew Scheer ultimately wasn't successful is because he didn't have a good answer to this question about abortion, about gay marriage, and people were worried that he was a religious zealot or something like that. I think that the Liberals right now are just so excited that this issue is something that the media will talk about and use it to paint Conservatives as being sort of anti-woman or whatever. Have you heard, we're at this conference with all these Conservative activists. Have you heard a lot of people talking about it? What's your take on how this will affect the Conservative leadership race and the Conservative movement more broadly in Canada?
Yeah, I haven't heard too much yet at the conference specifically, but just in the last few days, the one point that I've raised, I think I raised this on my show the other day, is that abortion is a wedge for Conservatives in a way that it isn't for the Liberals. And it used to be, but the Liberals under Justin Trudeau have just purged anyone that doesn't go along with Justin Trudeau's view on this from their caucus. So the Liberals are in lockstep with each other. The NDP, the Bloc are in lockstep. So they know that it's not at all, there's no losing when they bring it up. They just want to force Conservatives to have some stand up and say I'm pro-life and some stand up and say they're pro-choice. A divide that works within the Conservative Party that has always allowed for people to approach these issues and other issues of conscience from whichever perspective they'd like. But they know that then the CBC is going to go into overdrive, the Toronto Star, and it's going to be, these antiquated anti-woman dinosaurs, and it just goes into this whole thing. So what you need is a Conservative that can, and you touched on this with the Andrew Scheer observation, that can defend and sell their position, not necessarily to convert people, but to explain it, because defense isn't working. You get Conservatives that end up apologizing for their values, which is never the way you win anyone over. Leslyn Lewis has done a great job on this. She's put out her platform on abortion, which is no hidden agenda. And she said, this is what I stand for, boom, boom, boom. And as a result, there's not really that much criticism that she faces from the media because they don't sense that weakness that they do in a lot of other times. Yeah. Of like where it's like someone feels like they've been caught doing something they're not supposed to do. It's no, if you believe it, own it.
Right. Yeah, and I think you're right. Like there was a weird thing where, well, first of all, I just want to say that the media is so dishonest on this issue.
Yeah.
They treat it completely black and white, right?
Yeah.
You're either you either believe that birth begins at conception, in which case all abortions under any circumstances, no matter what, are going to be illegal.
Which is a minority position among pro-lifers.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Well, and even maybe people who have that view might not want to legislate that way. Yeah. And then the other side is like, the baby's born, but I changed my mind, and it's like no laws on abortion whatsoever. You can have late-term abortions, you can have partial abortions. We don't care. All abortion for everyone. The reality, Andrew, is that most Canadians fall somewhere in the middle. They probably do want protections against late-term abortions or sex-selective abortions. There's so much more nuance in this. But I saw the Journal de Montreal front page. They had the faces of all the Conservative MPs who they have called pro-life, and it's like they're perpetuating this idea that the people in the Conservative Party have like this really removed view that's so offside with the rest of the Canadian public, when of course there is more noise. I will just say, I think that by and large, Canadians and even most Conservatives just don't really want to have this discussion. They would prefer to just not talk about it, and they want the issue to be put to rest. And so to your point that Leslyn Lewis has been able to, very substantively explain her exact position, then there's no reason to keep pushing it, because there's no gotcha moment.
Yeah.
There's no opportunity to embarrass her in the way that I think they were able to embarrass, or at least catch Andrew Scheer flat-footed. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the one area where I would slightly disagree with that is that the status quo in Canada is unique in the world, and not in a good way, of zero laws, zero restriction at all. Technically, if you found a doctor to do it, you could have an abortion up to a minute before a child is delivered. That's rare. When Canadians learn about that, they're opposed to it, but Canadians don't know it. Sex-selective abortion as well, aborting a child for no reason other than you don't want a daughter. It's one of the largest motivating factors in some cultures towards abortion. Canadians don't know that's legal. When they do, they oppose it. So whatever you think of those policies, there are nuances to it that are lost in, as you mentioned, that dichotomy of pro-life, pro-choice, or pro-life, anti-choice, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, like these semantics that people bring into it. And I mean, Trudeau, it could backfire what he's done, because he's now said that we need to introduce legislation to ensure that this right to abortion in Canada is unshakable and no one can ever take it away. And he says we need to have a debate on it. It's okay, well, if you want to have a debate on it, that's what a lot of conservatives have wanted. They said, let's just have a discussion about this that allows us to talk about this. What about unborn victims of crime? What about sex-selective abortion? What about late-term abortion? And I could see, I mean, setting aside the makeup of the House of Commons right now, I could see if we did have a national discussion about abortion, Canadians settling on, maybe third trimester abortions are not a thing we should have. So it could backfire.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been looking into the U.S. because a lot of Americans are misled about what Roe does and doesn't do. I mean, the idea of legislating from the courts is not something that has a tradition in Canada or the U.S. So this idea that Roe would be the ones that would determine the laws rather than the Senate, the state Senate, the lawmakers, the people who are elected to make these decisions, to me, it's much better in the hands of people who have, are represented by the public as opposed to someone who's appointed for life that has, very little scrutiny and accountability. But also the idea that it would just immediately ban abortion all over the United States. Yeah. Obviously, it's going to be a states' rights issue. So states like California and New York are never going to, change the laws to ban abortion, whereas other states would. But the interesting thing is you look at the European Union, you look at countries in Europe that have laws already banning abortion at 15 weeks, 12 weeks, and you step back and say, oh, wow, Canada really is an outlier because we don't have any laws whatsoever. So maybe you're right that there is more of an appetite to have this discussion. And if so, I think Trudeau might be a little bit surprised with where the Canadian public is because, again, we're so misled. I'll just give another example for Fake News Friday. Ecos, which is run by Frank Graves, who is a sort of interesting character and a pollster that's not always very reliable. He put something out that said it's something like 80% of Canadians are pro-choice and only 12% are pro-life or something like that. Again, these euphemisms that don't really, people might not have really thought through what they mean. But, if you think that you have 80% of the Canadian public on your side, you might be much more brazen to go forth to try to legislate something, but then you might not realize all this nuance that's built in and all the views that Canadians have that are actually not black and white and have a lot of room for discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the role of Canadian politicians, is to take on these sort of important moral and cultural issues and help navigate through it. And so Trudeau's style of divide, wedge, demonize, I could see that all playing out. I don't know that that's really the direction that we want to go in our country. I don't know that that's the direction that we want to go in the conservative movement, but we might be headed there again from external factors. What else is on your mind at this convention? I know there's a lot of exciting speakers. Do you have any interesting interviews lined up? What do you have planned in Ottawa? Well,
I mean, obviously, you're the main event, which you play a role in. The leadership debate has been a big part of what a lot of people want to get out of this. And my hope is, in general, that whenever we have a forum like this where conservatives are coming together, and I use that with a small c, that people are talking about the movement itself, not just the day-to-day electoral politics and the horse racing, but the movement itself and the values. Because, victory without values is meaningless. Values without victory is also in its own way meaningless. I mean, you can die on a hill, but, and die for something, but if you're at the end of the day not doing anything with it, it's understandably challenging. So I think that, you need to start talking about the tactical things of how you win, but you also need to talk about what it is that you stand for. And I think that principles matter. And oftentimes we assume that principles are antithetical to victory, which I think is a big failing in the Conservative Party.
Well, and that's why it's great to be around conservative activists and people who, have really strong convictions in certain areas of expertise, areas of activism, because getting everybody in a space together provides an opportunity to have those discussions, have those debates, flesh them out, figure out exactly where we think, where we stand on different issues, and kind of get the ball rolling to the point you made earlier. Conservatives are often playing defense. It's like, why not take a step forward and start to push forth our own agenda? Well, it's great to be at an event in person. It's been a long time. It's great to just be around people without having to wear a mask and socially distance and all that kind of stuff.
And your own coworkers, some of whom you've never met in person until this weekend.
Yeah, we have that with a couple of our producers here. We've got Sean right there. We've never met him in person. Finally get to meet him in 3D instead of 2D. So it's great to be here. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's Fake News Friday. I'm Candice Malcolm, joined by Andrew Lawton. We are on the floor of the Convention Center in Ottawa. Thank you so much for tuning in.